Howdy, today on Flipping Science we're looking at microorganisms. So the science understanding we're going to look at, microorganisms are important living things, and microorganisms include bacteria, fungi and protists. So let's define what microorganisms are. They're also known as microbes. They're essentially organisms that are too small to be seen without microscopes. They can be unicellular or multicellular. Viruses are a group that are considered microbes, but they're not living, so we don't necessarily consider them to be microorganisms. Here's a picture of a virus down here. The reason why we don't consider it living is because it can't reproduce unless it's in a host. So a virus can't divide and make new viruses unless it infects cells that it reprograms to make more viruses. So that's why we don't really consider them living. There's three big groups of microorganisms. They're the bacteria, fungi and the protists, and we're going to talk about them in a bit of detail. So the first group we're going to look at is the bacteria. So bacteria are unicellular prokaryotic organisms. We talked about prokaryotic organisms before. They don't have a nucleus, they don't have membrane-bound organelles, very small simple cells. So here's an example down here. Here's some other examples. This is E. coli over here, and this is a cocci bacteria. I'm not sure what species that one is. Bacteria are everywhere, so we find them in the soil, they're in the air, they're in water, and they're also inside of you. A few kilos of your body mass is bacteria. About half the cells inside your body are bacterial cells, not human cells. Bacteria are useful to humans, but they can also cause disease. So they're useful because inside our bodies they break down food and they release vitamins that we can absorb, but they can also cause disease. So here I have E. coli, so here's a model of E. coli, and here's a picture of E. coli. E. coli can cause food poisoning. Now E. coli is present in your body as well. It's in your digestive system, so it's handy, but it's also can cause disease. Some fungi are members of the microorganisms as well. Fungi can be unicellular or multicellular, but they're all eukaryotic, and they're also all heterotrophic. They get their energy by consuming other organisms. A very common example of fungus is yeast. So yeast is, this picture down here shows yeast. Yeast is unicellular, and we use yeast to make bread and beer and wine. And crumpets, which are very important. Yeast take in sugar and they respire anaerobically and give off carbon dioxide and alcohol. And that carbon dioxide is used to make bread rise, and the alcohol is used to make beer beery. Mushrooms are another example of fungi, but they're not microorganisms because we can see them without using a microscope. Mushrooms are made up of tiny little strands called hyphae. Hyphae and mycelium when they're underground. They're quite tasty. There are many species of mushroom and toadstool as well. And what's a mushroom, what's a toadstool depends on what country you're from, so they're kind of interesting. Like I said before, they're heterotrophic, so yeast are consuming sugars. Things like mushrooms, they're breaking down dead organic matter from soils, and they use that to get their energy and also the materials that make them up. The last group we're going to look at are the protists. So protists are unicellular eukaryotic microorganisms. The protists are quite a diverse group because anything that's unicellular and eukaryotic that isn't a fungus is a protist. So it's a very diverse group. So because of that diversity, they can be autotrophic and heterotrophic. So if we have a look at the algae down here, we can see that they're going to be autotrophic. That green, that's chlorophyll again, so they're using light energy to help make their sugars. Heterotrophic, so the ones that consume other organisms. This amoeba down here is being heterotrophic. It's about to eat this little particle down here, the food particle. So there's no green in there, so it's consuming another organism to get its energy. Some examples, so algae, like I said here. Algae are very important for humans because they produce most of the oxygen that you breathe. Phytoplankton, so here's a picture of some phytoplankton. We can see again there's green inside there. Euglena, here's euglena, and here's amoeba. Most protists are unicellular, and all the ones I've shown you here are unicellular. And again, they can be quite useful. Some of these can also cause disease, as can some fungi, which I didn't mention before. So today on Flipping Science, I introduced the microorganisms. That's it for Flipping Science Day. See ya.